robots and most of the studies of robots have really dealt with the kinds of robots you see in the automobile factories. Those are physical robots. And you could think about, we didn't call tractors robots, but all kinds of machines that basically substituted for our physical labor. And most people view that as a good thing because we do better with our brains than with our bodies. I mean, if you're a professional athlete, you might have a different view, but that's the way we think of robots. The artificial intelligence, however, is sort of an artificial brain. And so suddenly there's a possibility, at least, that you're going to see, and you will begin to see, and I'll show you examples, where the substitution is not of a machine for something that wears our bodies down and that we're just very happy to have the equipment, but something that can beat us in things that we had thought were innately human. These were the jobs that they thought were most likely to be taken over by robots, and there's your 30, 40%, et cetera. I'm not, well, let me phrase it this way. I'm very suspicious of any of these studies that say this, but having said that, yeah, the robots are going to take over lots of jobs. We just don't know the numbers. We don't know exactly, et cetera. But you take a look at the jobs that will be involved. This is a much more serious, I think, analysis. No insult against the Australian government and the people they funded for this. But this was these two conferences are the big conferences of artificial intelligence people and robotic type people. And so they went off and they asked the 352 of these people the question. So you're now asking the people who build the machines and who are sort of experts in this. And you look and boom, so it takes 70 years before they can outdo us in everything, every job, but there's lists of jobs there. Now, obviously, experts could be wrong, as the same way the people who made the forecast for the Australian government. But you just sort of see this and you say, well, something obviously is happening, and there are these experts giving their views. One of the power of the artificial intelligence is that it can experience much more than we can, and the reason it experiences so much that we can is partly because it's dealing in a digital world, and we're dealing in a real world, and time and things are very different in the real world than in the digital world. Where we have a comparative advantage over a machine is our hands. Our hands are incredibly flexible. Hand-eye coordination we're really good at. Now I just want to say, what is it about this technology that creates something so different from the past that we should really be thinking about it in a different way? And I've already sort of said the first point. The technology is entering in a world in which so much of our work is digital. We are not digital creatures. The programs are digital. It's their space. We're doing our work in a space that is not meant for biological creatures that are like us. At the end, you'll see there may be a way out of that problem, but it has some issue. The second point, you see it where you fits with what I just said about learning. For the first time, we have serious learning by the machines, and they can learn faster, and they can go through more experiences than you or I have, and that's important. And the last thing is, because these machines are everywhere, it's a general purpose technology, basically to replace human work activity, and bang, that's a major factor. Now, the harder part where the robots are not quite up to speed is when they have to operate offline in our space, the world that we live in. But there's so much work now on sensors so that the robot can see things. And of course, there's no reason why it should be limited to the things we see. It could see on different lengths, wavelengths. It could see. It could pick up other things like, is there some? Could be counting other pollutants in this building. It could be doing a lot of things. And there's huge advances in sensors. So once you have the sensors, then the issue is, can the machine actually take action? And yes, it can. And they're still not as good as we can with our fingers and various things. But it's pretty clear the whole direction is the machines are getting better offline. They dominate us in a deep way online. And so it really is, it is an issue of a very new world. The first thing is that by robots, I mean the artificial intelligence, the whole bag of machine things, is they're getting closer and closer to human in everything they can do. And technically in economics, that means they have a higher elasticity of substitution. So if your elasticity of substitution is really, really high, you and the thing that's substituting for you, you're identical, basically. And that's what's going on. So this higher elasticity of substitutions. Two is that whatever task you're doing, the wage that you're going to be paid is going to be, they're not going to pay you more than it takes the machine to do it. So that's the wage is bounded by the cost of the robot substitute. But then what happens over time? Over time, the robots are getting better. There is no question that 10 years from now, the robots and the artificial intelligence programs will be much better, much faster, and therefore their quality goes up, and the cost of them doing your thing is going to be going down, and your wage for doing any of these activities is bounded by that. So that's the second rule. I'll give you some evidence for these things in a moment. And then finally, which to me was partially the human answer to this, is I sit there and I say, if I'm not giving the lecture here, and if you were not attending the lecture, you could have sent your robot to do that, and you would all be, he wanted to go off and eat and party. You'll all be off somewhere else along the waterfront. It's if you own the robot that is taking over your job, or the robots that are machines that are going to be doing so much human work, well then it benefits you. You can have more leisure. You can do other things that you may want to do. If all of those robots are owned by some rich guy, that's the person who's going to get the income from that technology, and all of us are going to be squeezed. So I coined this phrase, which I'm so happy to have coined this phrase, who owns the robots rules the world, because it captures the whole heart of what I think. This world robotics market is growing madly. They did not in this particular thing distinguish Australia. You're grouped with some other places where it doesn't look like it's growing as much as in other spots. But that could just be this is the way this data was presented. But globally it's growing. The country where it's growing the most rapidly is China. And that's an interesting phenomenon, since in China the wages are pretty low, and you would have thought people could compete against the robots better than otherwise. But they're madly increasing very rapidly there. There's some more evidence now on this is now says expected to grow. It's a little hard. It's harder to get data on how many artificial intelligence type programs are being used by companies nowadays. And so this is expected. That's all I can say. But they're expecting it to zoom up. And I assume they'll be right. And then where they think it's going to increase the most. And you'll see there's a lot of this in the, quote, intellectual brain stuff, where everyone in this room, I assume no one here is a movie star in the action movies or something. So it's us who are going to be experiencing this. And there is the shares of companies investing in AI. This is a very funny statistic because it's the share, if you have 100 companies, they're saying, well, how many of those companies on a survey said they're investing in AI things? But you see the 32% seems natural, but it's companies all over the place. You'd love to have that kind of question answered over a period of time, see where it's increasing the most, ... I mean, the part of the analysis that's I'm sort of flailing a bit is I just don't have measures of which companies have introduced which softwares to automate their particularly their white collar activities. And that data just does not currently exist. And I'm applying for a grant so I can try to at least try with it to get some data like that. And here is another slide about where they think the things are going to go, and which places you will see more of this. Bill Gates said tax the robots, which was not one of the best suggestions going. But Thomas Piketty wrote this famous thing about and he said a global capital tax. Well, it's just inconceivable that all the countries in the world could get together and agree on a tax on capital, or you'd have a tax on robots. I view those things as not very possible. And so I have a different kind of solution. First, at the very bottom, I give a solution that has gotten some semi-serious attention and which has some logic to it. This is the universal basic income, which says, okay, we're going to have people won't have as good jobs as in the past. Their wages will be lower. It's all been done by machines. So the government will just tax whoever it is that is making the money, and they will give everybody a nice income. And we do this with some goods. Parks are generally free for everybody, so we make it a public good. Some countries, not the U.S., have universal health care kind of system. Everybody's covered by the basic health. It's a set of things. You once had free education here, but it's still pretty cheap by U.S. standards. And everybody goes freely to elementary, and so it's a set of goods that we regard as normal for human life. And I could see a universal basic income. That's possible. That's possible. But I have a different kind of solution, and that's through ownership of the things, direct ownership, as opposed to relying on politicians to tax one set of people who won't want to pay the taxes and will fight it, and redistribute it. When I first started getting interested in this, and everybody said, oh, it's because you like science fiction or something, and et cetera, et cetera. And there was a standard response. And I have a couple of places actually debated one of my friends in economics who gives these standard responses. And the first response is, every time there's any problems in the labor market, there's somebody who says it's all the fault of technology and the machines. The Great Depression, FDR said, his policies created lots of jobs, but the jobs got destroyed by the technology of that time. And we had I already mentioned the 1960s. So there was a whole set of, this is quite normal. So a lot of people just sit there, economists say, wait a minute, do you know any economic history? We've always had these fears, and they always turn out to be false. And even more strong than that, look, are we faced with giant unemployment and joblessness around the advanced world? No, I understand Australia didn't even have a Great Recession, but most countries have recovered from the Great Recession. Certainly the economies have recovered. Employment in the US is still a bit lower than it was per person, before the recession. In Britain, I think it may even be higher. Everybody's getting low wages, but it's hard. So there's a response that just says this is just not real. And so you have on the one side, you have economists and economic historians looking back and saying it sounds like the same old stuff. And on the other side, you have the people who make robot soccer teams who are doing all kinds of robotics things, and they are experts who are saying, oh, this is something new. So, when I first started teaching, I taught this book. This is Herbert Simon, who's both an economist and a roboticist, one of the Nobel Prize-winning, really, really smart guys. Because the Carnegie Mellon, which is one of the headquarters in the US for this kind of thinking, he created, not the university, but he created that department and so on. And I would teach this for years, and then I decided that he was wrong. And so his claim was any technical change meant that workers had to benefit. And the reason was that capital is basically infinitely elastic, whatever the return to capital is. Labor, since we no longer are in a Malthusian world, labor is pretty fixed. Any time you have things that raise productivity and you have good full employment policies, the beneficiaries are the more fixed factor. And what's very nice about when Simon gives, there was a lot of math to this model, but it's simplified, you can understand it, just the logic of it. And there was clear evidence. Productivity was going up certainly in the 60s, and so too were real wages of people. There was no divergence. And it just looked like, heck, in fact, the 1960s scare did turn out to be false. So this is what I would teach. And then here's a wonderful full statement that the only problem we really face are problems of scarcity, and the idea that we're going to be in this glorious abundance where all the work is being done by robots or whatever, automation is not true. But now, if you go back and you say, what were the facts he lived on? The facts he lived on was that earnings were rising with productivity. That's no longer true in the US or most countries. Australia, I realize, is a little closer to that, has not really had as big a divergence as the other countries. In, I think it's 26 of 30 OECD countries, the share of national income that goes to capital has gone up, and it's gone up pretty substantively. It's gone up in China, it's gone up. So around the world is this shift towards capital. That is not what the world that Simon saw when he said this did not occur. So I think now that it's a wonderful book to read, by the way. It's a short little paperback, 200 pages, 150 pages probably, and et cetera. And then there's a second argument that economists make to say that don't worry about this. And this is comparative advantage. There'll always be some job for us. And we just have to figure out what our comparative advantage is versus the robots and the artificial intelligence. So what is it? That's the question. Two professors in Boston, one Darun Acemoglu, who was from the LSE, and I knew him when he was a graduate student. He was one of my most favorite people to talk to because he's very creative. He's at MIT, not Harvard. And a student of his did an analysis of industrial robots on wages and jobs. And let me start off by saying they had previously written a theoretical paper that basically said, don't worry about all this robot stuff. It's not really going to happen. But they have unlike some economists, they went out and got evidence, and they changed their views. This is something we really appreciate. So what you've got there is the exposure to robots, and then you have wages or employment. It's by areas because the data comes in by area. You cannot get from the Federation of the Robot Manufacturers which companies buy the robots and which, so you can get some more aggregated data they're willing to provide you. And that is pretty powerful that it affects both employment and wages. And let me just add one other comment to this, and then I'll criticize it a little bit, but I think it's basically right. The other comment is, since the data comes in the form of how many robots are being sold, basically, to a particular industry in a particular geographic area, the analysis looks at wages in the industry in the area as well. And so that if you thought, oh, well, this guy's going to build robots and they're really going to create many more jobs in the area, no, that's not what the data says is happening. The particular data set, just by the way, includes data in Australia. And nobody's yet analyzed the Australian data. Has data in China as well. But this is, so we now have an empirical study by people who originally did not want or did not believe that this was going to occur in the data. So that to me is very, very striking. These are only industrial robots. And those are basically automobile-type factory robots. And I think those are the least ones we have to worry about. It's much more the brain ones, the service sector robots, the artificial intelligence. That's what you really have to worry about. Then I'll just show you for the US, the decline we've had in labor share of capital. And I say Australia's done better on this than most advanced countries for whatever reason. I don't know the reason. But it's just labor share keeps falling. And that means shares going to capital, and whoever owns the capital is getting wealthy, and those of us who work without capital, without capital ownership, we're being squeezed. Human enhancement technology. I don't know, about 4 years ago, I was invited to a meeting of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences to discuss human enhancement technology. And you said, I was the only economist they could find who would go. I mean, I probably was pretty high on their list, but that's what they told me. He said, most of the times I want to hear about this. And it was the US military, about how they're going to enhance our soldiers. So they all become like The Rock. They'll be faster, stronger than whoever they're fighting, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a serious research being done by I'm sure it's not just the US military, about enhancing human activities. And then there was the one at the bottom. They're talking about getting some electric charges to get the brain working when you're running some drones or something. So all of these things are basically saying if the robots and the artificial intelligence is going to make great competitors for us, what we do is we bring them inside us, and now we own them as part of us, et cetera. I would be shocked if this doesn't happen over some long-term period. And there's this interesting situation where you have the person whose arm got destroyed, and now you can put an artificial arm on and connect it more or less to the brain so they can control it. And there's a legal ethics kind of issue. I have the arm, and I go and I hit her. And I say, no, I didn't tell it. The arm was doing it by itself. There was a short circuit. You don't want to sue me. You want to sue the company that put the arm in. So there's obviously there are issues as you put in more and more artificial things into people. Technology is different, and we have to take ownership of it if we expect it to benefit all of us.